Aaron Dykes here for True Stream Media. Now, we've seen the effects of climate change over the past decade or two, not in terms of the weather and the temperatures of the earth and what happens, but we've seen the political response to climate change. We've seen the one side jump on and beat the wagon about how we've got to have global agreements as soon as possible and force people into making changes. We've seen other sides repulsed by the idea of socially engineering society and controlling things to get things done. Now, here's the latest from the London Telegraph by James Lovelock, who's been very much on the saving the world from climate change agenda. But he's now saying, we're a little too late, too much on trying to save the whole world through climate change. We've wasted time with a global agenda. We should move to city-based agendas, and we should have populations compact into cities and retreat to climate-controlled cities, kind of like giant air-conditioned population centers. And his argument's along the lines of, it would be great to reduce carbon emissions in the coming decades and, turn around climate change, but we've wasted valuable time, energy, resources, etc., and it sounds like a good idea to save the whole planet, but it hasn't been rational, and basically it's a foolish extravagance that leans towards, in his argument, northern ideologies. And he says instead that in a changing climate, cities are a better place because they're less vulnerable to external heat than are individuals. And that if most of us lived in cities, as we're pretty much doing now and will be increasingly doing in the future, well, this will be better because we can just regulate the climate of the cities, and that will be easier both economically and feasibly than trying to save the whole world. So we should all get in these population centers and let the rest of the planet go where it will. Well, that's a very interesting argument. I don't know really that it has any technical basis, but it's very much in line with the Agenda 21 platform that's based on a lot of these environmental pretexts and definitely upon corporate control. Now, if you haven't seen this before, it's America 2050. It's an offshoot of the Agenda 21 plan. It's part and parcel with Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation funding. And look at what they're showing. They're showing the emerging mega regions in the existing population centers, like on the East Coast, the former industrial areas of the Great Lakes, Atlanta and the other areas of the South, Florida, its own area, the big areas of Texas, the Texas Triangle and the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, and especially Northern California, Southern California, and Cascadia, which is Seattle, and then also Washington and Oregon. And what these are is emerging megaregions where they're projecting that population is going to double or more by 2050. And basically, they're going to be pushing people out of rural areas and even more into the mostly already existing cities, all of which will be growing by leaps and bounds. I live here in Austin, Texas, where this agenda has been very much underway since at least around 1997, when they really started pushing for this agenda of smart growth and jumping on the idea that they wanted to build an Agenda 21 designed smart city where they could build big skyscrapers, compact in a lot of people, and bring in the kinds of services and ideas that people want from rural areas and other types of living, and dangle baubles and appearances of things as they get people to live in cities, travel by train, connect with other metro areas by train, plane, whatever, but less and less by automobile and less sprawled out. And whatever you think of that idea, it's going to mean a lot more people in small areas, while the wilderness is basically returned to wilderness and to federal land management control. We've seen that pop up this week with the fight in Nevada for grazing rights with cattle on federally controlled lands, right? It's a big agenda for them. It's been going on for a while. Maybe you've seen some of these maps before about the corridor system and the reserve system. They're going to build giant NAFTA superhighways up the vertical stripes of the different parts of the U.S., but more and more, the majority of the actual land will be rewilded and controlled on a global scale by the corporate entities, and the people will live in increasingly small areas that are basically cities. Okay, whatever. Interesting, right? And this guy's talking about literal climate-controlled cities. Well, how about this part of the agenda, which has already been flaunted in decades past? That's dome cities. That's how far smart cities can go. Once people are compacted in, living in bigger and bigger skyscrapers, once they find a way to spiral people into these pockets, they may actually build physical giant domes where they could quite easily, literally, air condition the entire climate of cities. If it's too hot, they could do that. If there's too much carbon, they could control what kind of air. And the real world will be somewhere else beyond where you're living. You'll be living in a completely artificial area, and all the inputs will be controlled by the elites, the social engineers, the designers. Your values will be there, and the whole economy will be based on an artificial scarcity system where you can't breathe, you can't eat meat, you can't have luxury goods, you can't drive cars because it's hurting the earth. They're limited things. There's too many people in the cities they've packed you into, and if you have any money at all, you're going to pay a premium for them. And this was actually depicted back in the 70s in Zero Population Growth, which was an extreme dystopic take on the scarcity of resources, the growing smog and climate change problem, and the need to prevent people from having babies and reproducing at all. And it took it all the way to the extremes of having propaganda that said things like a baby is forever and completely outlawing couples from childbirth, and in the stead giving them artificial dolls that talk and say things about mommy that will give couples the feeling of having a baby while they're completely outlawed from having one. And they live in dome cities that are climate controlled because, as you could see in this still, the city's so smog filled and so polluted that they have to stay in their towers under the dome city, and all the politics is controlled globally by a big corporate board. So there's a little breakdown of James Lovelock's latest proposal. Forget about saving the world, just contract into climate-controlled cities. All right, that's it for TrueStream Media.